My name is Javier Perez. I am a professor in this sports science faculty. My topic is APA, Adapted Physical Activity and Sports, and I am the director of the Center for Inclusive Sport Studies, who is very proudly co-organizer of this Congress. And I really want to thank the organizing committee to be sensible to the fact and to the phenomena of Paralympic sport and adapted sport in the framework of the topic of this Congress. It is my pleasure to present this morning Professor Yves Vanlandewijck. Yves Vanlandewijck, PhD, is full professor in rehabilitation sciences at the Faculty of Kinesiology and Rehabilitation Sciences of the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium. And he is the chairperson of the International Paralympic Committee Sports Science Committee since 2004. Also, he is the program director of the educational board of the Erasmus Mundus Master in Adapted Physical Activity of the Faculty of Kinesiology and Rehab Science at the KU Leuven, where many of us, we had a chance and the opportunity to study APA at the European level, and some of the former students are already here. And Yves is author of plenty of dozens of scientific articles regarding wheelchair sports, ID, basketball, functional classification, plenty of topics regarding Paralympic sport, adapted physical activity, or Paralympic sports. Thank you, Yves, for being here this morning. And I would like to just mention that he will focus his presentation about the impact of technology, the impact of medication and disability, specific impact on sport performance. Thank you very much, Yves.
I would like to start with a short video to bring you a little bit into the mood of Paralympic sport. It's a little video that I have borrowed from Channel 4, and you probably already saw it, but I think it's quite impacting on your emotion when you look at these kind of images. So just enjoy this 90 seconds of clip. I think still many people do not understand that every athlete, in fact, is a hero, is a person who did an enormous fight to reach a certain level with a lot of dedication. And as a person with a disability, being an athlete, you're a double hero. You have to fight a double fight. And that is what the video, in fact, wants to show us. It's an incredible performance of people with a disability to reach the level of Paralympic sport. I'm going to address a topic which is not my specific topic that I am familiar with, which is always dangerous. I'm not the anti-doping specialist, but as being the chairperson of the Sports Science Committee, I have been asked to be involved in quite some research. Is this better? I have been asked to be involved in some research on Paralympic sports and doping, and you will see what I'm talking about. First of all, when I am starting a presentation, I always have to introduce a little bit myself and my beautiful city of Leuven, of course, because one day perhaps you will visit it. Leuven is very small. This is the perimeter. The diameter is only 3 kilometers. And if you have very, very good eyes, then you could see that this is a track and field court here. And my faculty, my building where my office is, would be just outside of Leuven over here. As I said, 3 kilometers, 90,000 inhabitants. Yes, and from those 90,000, 45,000 are students. Can you imagine? It is a city that is dominated by the students. 15,000 are university employees. So now you wonder, what about the other 30,000? Well, we have the biggest beer brewery in Leuven. Where do you think they are? Well, they are or brewing the beer or serving the beer to the 45,000 students. So they are in the pubs and in the restaurants and so on. And this became the symbol of Leuven, and the students, they call it the drinking student. Yes. So while he is studying, he's pouring beer in his brain. That's not true. That's what the students made out of it. The reason is, this is fons sapientiae. It's the source of wisdom. Yes. And, well, when you are 45,000 out of 90,000, you can say whatever it is. As a student, you are right. This is some beautiful buildings. This is the town hall from Leuven. This is the university library. And this is a practical test, if you come to Leuven, that you have to do. This is the old market. It's car-free now. There are no cars anymore. And from there up to here, over here, back over there, it's one pub next to the other. So when you come to Leuven, it's an anti-doping test. You will have to go in the first pub and drink a beer, go to the second and drink a beer, go to the third, and when you make it the whole tour, you can still say in Dutch that Leuven is a beautiful city, you can stay. Yes. Okay, what I'm doing there, except of being a person who is enjoying the city, is some research and classification. And what we try to do there is making the relationship impairment-performance. What we want to try to find out is, what's the impact of a certain impairment on a specific performance? This is a wheelchair. These are wheelchair rugby athletes. They have most of the time cervical spinal cord injury, so they broke their neck in human language, and they are using very specific equipment to go over the court back and forth. Main aspects of wheelchair rugby is you need acceleration, you need to be fast, you need to be fast in a straight line, and you also need to be very maneuverable in the chair. So how much is this kind of impairment impacting on this kind of performance? If there is no answer to that question, we shouldn't organize this sport, because we cannot organize it in a fair way. We should understand what the impact is of impairment on performance. Just a very simple example. If you have a C6, C7 lesion level of the neck, and you would do a maximal speed sprint in a classical wheelchair, you would reach a speed of approximately 14 to 15 kilometers an hour. Yes? If you have one lesion level higher, which is a C5 lesion level, you would reach a maximal sprint velocity of about 7.5 to 8 kilometers an hour. We are talking about 2 centimeters difference when it comes to the cervical spinal cord, and you look at what the impact is on something that is so important in this specific sport, which is the acceleration, the speed that you can develop in the chair. It's an enormous, enormous impact. We have to understand this. Another example, of course, that you all know is, because this is Oscar Pistorius, he's the Blade Runner, the man who has a double below knee amputation, and he's using blades to go around the track, and he participated in London in the 400-meter Olympics and Paralympics. Afterwards, you know, he did other things where he is being trialed for, and that is something else. I'm not going to discuss this part, but this part is very interesting because he was allowed to participate in the 400-meter Olympics. Now, there's already a first question when it comes to boosting performance. When it comes to, is it possible that prostheses are going to boost your performance up to the level that you become even better than a person who is able-bodied? Yes or no? Well, the Court of Arbitration of Sport decided that he could participate. I am asking you one question. How much information do we have about the impact of a double below amputee running with blades on the start of a 400 meter. How does that impact the start compared to able-bodied? Is that one study done that gives an answer to this? Answer, no. What's the impact of a double amputee running in a curve and accelerating up to maximal speed? Because that's the second part of a 400 meter. Is there one study done? No. What's the knowledge that we have about running maximal speed in a curve? One study scientifically done? No. What do we know about straight line maximal speed running? We have the famous studies of Bruggeman from Köln and from Wayland in the United States. Those studies were done. They are discussing still what the outcome is. They still didn't come to a consensus and to a conclusion that makes sense. And it was not maximal speed. It was approximately 85 to 90% of maximal speed that they did the testing. My question is, if you are asked, is it allowed that this person can run in the Olympics, and the information that you have is almost zip, nothing. If I am a wise person, I would say, I'm not going to give an answer to that. So there is a lot of technology used in Paralympic sport. And the question is, what do we know about the impact? There is almost no research done. Please keep that in mind. But I'm not going to talk about this kind of boosting. I'm going to talk, first of all, about this population, which is a population of people with spinal cord injury. Yes? When I'm talking about them, they play rugby, they play basketball, they are in wheelchair racing, hand cycling, and they have lesion levels, mainly from C5 lesion level down. Yes? This is how it looks like. They have motor function deficits, sensory function. What we are going to look at is autonomic function. It's extremely important. The autonomic function of a person with spinal cord injury. Here you have some statistics. Cervical spine is a little bit more involved than the rest of the spine. Most of the time it's balanced between complete and incomplete. 75% are traumatic. And males are a little bit more disadvantaged when it comes to having a spinal cord injury than females. But isn't that general in life, that males are disadvantaged compared to females? No answer, okay. Good. Life expectancy, paraplegics, they have the same life expectancy than able-bodied thanks to modern medicine. And quadriplegics, they have 5 to 10 years less life expectancy. But this is not about the athletes I'm talking. This is mainly because they make an average of all the cervical spinal cord injuries, and you have to look at the top, which probably have less life expectancy, so C5 lesion levels and above. There is something you have to take into consideration to understand what I'm going to talk about, and that is one specific aspect about spinal cord injury, and that is the cardiovascular adaptation to exercise of these guys. And this is really extremely important that you can follow me in this. If you're doing exercise, then you need blood going to the muscles. And we are looking at this and talk about the cardiac output. As much cardiac output per minute is needed. The more you can bring blood to the muscles, the better your performance is going to be. Well, when you look at people with paraplegia and people who are able-bodied, then you can see that the cardiac output for a given increased performance is about the same. But here it stops earlier for paraplegics compared to able-bodied. When we look at the cardiac output, what is the cardiac output? It is the stroke volume every time the heart is beating and putting blood into the system, multiplied by how many times the heart is doing that per minute. Yes, it's a very simple multiplication. Well, what do we see? That the stroke volume of paraplegics is lower than that of able-bodied, and they have to compensate by means of heart rate. indeed, because the whole bottom part of the body is paralyzed, the venous return to the heart is minimized. So when the heart doesn't get a lot of blood, it cannot pump a lot of blood into the system. So they have to pump at a higher frequency to reach the same cardiac output. That's one thing we have to understand. A second thing is the bottom line here. Due to sympathetic dysnervation, the maximal heart frequency is minimized for those who have a lesion level above T6 to approximately 100, let's say 35 beats per minute. This means that if I'm a young guy and I'm 20 years old, there is this easy formula, which is not 100% correct, saying that my maximum heart frequency would be 220 minus 20H, so my maximum heart frequency would be approximately 200. If I am going to have a spinal cord injury, high lesion level, complete above T6, suddenly my maximal heart frequency, even though my age is still 20, will drop up to 135 approximately. And I need my heart frequency to compensate for a decreased stroke volume. Okay, now we are going to look at a very specific medication. Who knows what kind of medication this is? Ah, you liars. You all know what it is. Viagra, yes? Okay. And you know this also as sildenafil citrate. Now what happened is a few years ago, there was an athlete, and he was playing, it's not this athlete, but another athlete from the national wheelchair rugby team came to me, and he said, Yves, I have a problem. And my problem is that I want to have sexual intercourse with my wife. I said, why is that a problem? He said, well, because I'm a tetraplegic, I use Viagra. And I said, and does it work? He said, yes, perfectly. But, he said, the problem is that WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency, is thinking about putting that on the list of forbidden products. Now what do I do? Because I use it on a quite frequent basis. And there are the whereabouts, I can be tested any time in and outside of competition. So we said, okay, let's look into literature, what is happening there. And we did a systematic review, and it was done in 2012, so it went up to March 2011. And this is the outcome, so this is where we were looking at. Randomized controlled trials on the impact of sildenafil citrate on exercise capacity. In able-bodied, we did find 9 studies, and in spinal cord injury, none. Exercise performance, we found 2 studies, which were also from those 9, and spinal cord injury, none. Which means that there is no evidence at all on what sildenafil citrate, or Viagra in this case, is doing with respect to exercise capacity and exercise performance. Now you need to understand what the difference is between those two. Exercise capacity is the peak performance that you can deliver. And most of the time we do it in the laboratory, and we bring you to maximal exercise in about best 8 to 12 minutes. So from rest, warming up, to maximal exercise in about 8 to 12 minutes. That would be an ideal time to reach your peak. That's the peak performance, and this is what I call exercise capacity. Now you have to understand, how many sports do you know where you start in rest, and after a little warm-up, in 8 to 12 minutes you go to the peak and then it's finished? Not too many sports. There are many sports where you're working on a submaximal level for a longer period of time. So to really know if sildenafil citrate has an impact, we are looking at exercise performance, which is submaximal, high submaximal level continuous effort over a longer period of time. This is what we need to look at. Okay? And now the question is, does it have an impact? So let's first look into the able-bodied sample. Of course, there are inclusion criteria and so on, so you know how we do a systematic review. I'm not going to bother you with those details. And then it comes here. We had 518 hits, and we reduced them at the end to 9 randomized controlled trials. 9 controlled trials that were really done on able-bodied and were testing what the impact was of sildenafil citrate on exercise capacity or exercise performance. Of course, there was a quality review done on the quality, scientific quality of the paper and so on. 2 reviewers did this, so that this was not just the judgment of one person, but it was done by 2 independent reviewers. This is the result. Here we have the 9 authors. You see 2004 to 2010. This is the number of people tested. As you can see, the maximum number is 21. Yes, which is a quite small sample. Try to remember 21 for later on. We test them at sea level, moderate altitude and high altitude, because we want to put the lungs under a little bit of stress to see if at high altitude there is indeed an impact of Viagra on exercise capacity and performance. As you can see, only 1 study is done at high level 2,100 or moderate altitude. All the other ones are at quite high altitudes. Here 3,874 is the lowest from all. A and C means that we are looking at acute versus chronic hypoxia, which means that when you bring a person to the base camp of the Mount Everest, and some of them did, and you're going to test the day after arrival, we would call this acute hypoxia. You arrive and you have to do the test almost immediately. There is no acclimatization. Yes? Chronic would mean that you're going to stay a while, you're going to acclimatize, and then you're going to do the test. As you can see, they are giving 50 or 100 most of the time milligrams of sildenafil citrate. 5 of them did a maximal test, so here we can check the peak, and 2 of them did at the end also a performance test, a sort of a time trial submaximal test. Is there any consensus? Well, there is consensus. There is consensus on, and this is in rest, and this is during exercise, what the impact is of sildenafil citrate on the pulmonary pressure in the lungs. And that's mainly one of the reasons why this medication was developed, to reduce the pulmonary pressure in the lungs. And as you can see, sildenafil citrate here in acute hypoxia, in rest, this is placebo, this is sildenafil citrate. Here during exercise, exactly the same in acute hypoxia. This is in chronic, again, exercise, placebo, sildenafil citrate. You can see that the pressure in the lungs is going to go down, which could probably benefit the oxygenation of the blood and perhaps has an impact on performance. Okay? Now let's have a look at the 5 tests over here. Is there any consensus? Well, 2 studies say yes, there is impact. You are going to have an impact on exercise capacity. 3 of them say no, there is no impact. Let's look at the 2 studies that show any impact. This is the first study from Gofrani, a very interesting one. He started with 14 subjects, participants. He randomized, assigned them to a placebo group and a sildenafil group. 1 day washout, then a crossover. The placebo group got sildenafil, sildenafil group got placebo. Then they were going to the Mount Everest base camp. Yeah, so they were not climbing up, they flew up. And they stayed there for an acclimatization period of 14 days. And then they did exactly the same protocol again. Okay? Isn't this a very nice scenery to do your research? This is base camp Mount Everest, where they were doing exercise testing. Well, what's the result? In this case here, you can see this was tested in normoxic conditions. So they were not put under any hypoxic pressure. And you can see what the result is with and without placebo. Now you bring them under pressure, yes, and you can see that there is immediately a drop in performance, because this is exercise capacity in watt, so it's the power output. What you can see is that the drop is less for the sildenafil group than for the group who got placebo, which means that sildenafil is going to enhance performance in that group. Afterwards, when they switch, you see that the sildenafil group is dropping when they get placebo, and the placebo group is increasing their performance again, probably thanks to the sildenafil. And when they go to Mount Everest, you see exactly the same pattern. Only here there was a little acclimatization period, and therefore the levels are a little bit higher compared to the left diagram. The other study was from Richalet, so the first one clearly shows that there is an impact on exercise performance. This is the other one, and here you can see Richalet. He first did a maximal test at sea level, then they went one day to Chamonix in France, then they went up to another station at 4,350 meters, and the day after arrival they are doing a maximal test again. And they stay for 3 days, and they do a maximal test again. So you have an acute hypoxia situation, and then one where you have acclimatization of 3 days. Then you go drop down again to sea level, and you do a maximal test again. Okay, when you look at the results, they are very nice, significant, which is when we put sea level values, the first measurement, at the same level, then you can see that the decrease in maximal oxygen consumption, the decrease, so the impact is way more significant when you have placebo than when you have sildenafil. So you decrease less thanks to sildenafil, your performance is less negatively impacted. Also after 3 days, so that's day 2 at high altitude, after 3 days of acclimatization, you see the process of acclimatization, which is that performance improves, but still the group that got Viagra, they are performing better compared to when they do not have that medication. And then they'll go back to sea level, and still there is some leftovers from what happened at a high altitude. Okay? So, last part that we have to look at is maximal exercise performance, and here we are looking at the time trials that have been done. Well, I can be very, very short in this. When you look at the time trial, then here we have to look at, let's look at the bottom figure, because this is the power output that they can deliver during the time trial, and this of course will be translated into the distance that they can cover in a certain amount of time that they do the time trial. Then you can see that this is during, this is at moderate altitude. This was the only study, by the way, that was testing at moderate altitude, and this was at high altitude. At moderate altitude, this Arthur Kressler, he found a little negative impact of sildenafil citrate on the performance, and on high altitude, no impact, while this man, Su, he found a positive impact at high altitude of sildenafil citrate. What are the conclusions? The conclusions for this group of men who are able-bodied, because we do not have any results on people with spinal cord injury. Of course, there is no randomized control trial done looking at the impact of sildenafil citrate on spinal cord injury. That's the first conclusion. Only 2 studies were done under hypobaric hypoxic conditions, where you effectively bring the person to the high altitude and do the test over there. Most of the studies are done at sea level, and they're going into a climate chamber, and then you are going to simulate high altitude, which is of course not hypobaric. Then you have only 1 study done on moderate altitude. That was the last study that I showed you. There's 1 study on able-bodied. No consensus in the 5 studies when it comes to the impact of sildenafil citrate on the peak exercise capacity. There is no consensus. 2 studies say yes, 3 studies say no. They don't say there is a negative impact, they just say there is no impact. Yes. And there is no consensus in the 2 studies done on the impact of sildenafil citrate on exercise performance. So, at the end, in general, we can say, well, not too much has been studied when it comes to sildenafil citrate. Most of the competitions are done, and that's what I will show you in the next slide, is done 2,200 meters or lower. There are not too many competitions in any sport that go higher than 2,200 meters. So all these studies where you're going to test the impact at base camp of Mount Everest probably only have an impact on those who go to base camp Mount Everest. And there are not too many people, I can assume. So with respect to generalization to sports, high altitude studies are not really what we are looking for. We look at those studies where you really have realistic conditions that you also will find in competition. And what we find is, well, there is some impact. When we find some impact, it's always at high altitude, yes, and we do not find any negative impact. Yes, negative impact nobody reported except of the last study on moderate altitude where there is a negative impact. It's the only one. Okay, so what we decided is, I brought this to the Sports Science Committee of the IPC, and I brought it to the Medical Committee, and together we decided, okay, we need to do this randomized control trial ourselves. We will search for partners. And at the end, it was my own university, Leuven, who did the data collection on 15 tetraplegics and paraplegics, and the Notwil Swiss Paraplegic Center in Switzerland, who did 12. So we are looking at a sample now of 27 people with spinal cord injury, with a very specific level of spinal cord injury, which I think we can be proud of. When you think that in the able-bodied, and able-bodied you can find on any corner of every street, they were able to have studies maximum 21. Do you remember the number? So we, with our spinal cord injured, and we do not find them on every corner of the street, we found 27 people who are well trained because they need to be able to do a maximal test and a time trial at a certain level. Okay. Checking the time. What we did was synchronous arm cranking on this machine. It's an ergometer that we bought in Germany. The cranks here are asynchronous. What they were put in our experiment were put synchronous. So they push like hand cycling. Why? Because one of the expectations was that all the athletes should be experienced in hand cycling. We didn't want them to do something they were not experienced in. So they were experienced, and therefore we did the hand cycling simulation. They did a maximal test, starting at 20 watts for 2 minutes, and then we increased with 5 watts every 30 seconds, and they had to keep up a frequency of 60 to 80 rounds per minute. Afterwards, in a time trial, they started at 50% of the peak power output of the previous maximal test that they did, and they were allowed to adjust the power output every 5 minutes during the first 25 minutes, and then at the end, because at the end it's almost finished, now I'm going to really get everything out of it, they were allowed to adjust every minute so that they could really go to maximal effort in a submaximal exercise. And that is the performance that we are measuring. The design, after 2 trials of familiarization at sea level, 1 and 2, they did a 30-minute time trial, because time trial, you also have to learn how to do this, so it's good that you once have the experience or twice. They did 4 tests, of course 1 with placebo at sea level, 1 with sildenafil at sea level, 1 at placebo at moderate altitude, and 1 sildenafil citrate at moderate altitude. And we have chosen to do a 2,200 meter altitude because, as I said, we screened all the competitions of the past 2 years. So in 2012, that was 2010 up to 2012. And we were searching for the highest level where some kind of endurance sport was done. And there we came up with 2,200. So there were no other studies, no other competitions at higher levels done. Every time we did a maximal test and a time trial. I can be short. We are publishing the data at this very moment, so I will be quite short on the data. And this is The peak performance, what you can see is that the placebo at sea level, they performed the best, and there was a little significant difference, but only just with the 3 other groups, and that's indicated over here. Yes. And it means that in principle, when we find some kind of an impact on the peak performance, it will be because of the sildenafil, and it will be an impact in a negative direction, which means that you have a negative impact on peak performance. But the difference was really, really just borderline, so we have to be quite careful with these data. But this is peak performance, and this is not the most interesting, as I said. We should look at the performance capacity, the exercise performance in a time trial. And we did not find any differences at sea level. There are no differences in peak performance. But this is at moderate altitude, placebo against sildenafil citrate. And as you can see, the peak power is a little bit different, not significant. But with sildenafil citrate, you deliver a little bit less power, but that little bit less you deliver with a significant higher heart rate and a significant higher lactate production. Which means that you are delivering less performance and it costs you more energy. This is a clearly negative impact that sildenafil citrate has on submaximal exercise over a longer period of time, in this case 30 minutes. What's the conclusion for this group of spinal cord injury? By the way, these are both rugby players, as you can see. What they are doing here is not modern dance, but it's the haka. You know the haka in rugby, where they are trying to intimidate by, it's a war song that they are doing. Really, really nice to watch, sometimes even nicer than the game itself. I love the haka when they perform this. And they also do it in the wheelchair. And in the wheelchair, it's even more impressive when they do it, because then they hit on the chair, it makes the noise, and it's really beautiful to see them do that. Well, what's the conclusion for the wheelchair rugby and for those with spinal cord injury in general? Well, at moderate altitude, 2,200 meters, under acute hypoxia, there is no or slightly negative impact of sildenafil citrate on exercise capacity in spinal cord injury, but there is a negative impact of sildenafil citrate on exercise performance in spinal cord injury. So this would mean that you have a negative impact instead of a performance enhancing impact. And perhaps this is logical. And therefore I explained you in the beginning the problem that there is with the stroke volume. There is not enough blood going to the heart in the person with spinal cord injury. Now, when you're going to take sildenafil citrate, you get vasodilation. And if this vasodilation is also in the splanchnic area, then probably also it will impact even more on the venous return. So your stroke volume probably will even be less than what it is without Viagra. And that could be the theoretical explanation. Of course, this we did not prove because we didn't measure cardiac output, which is is a more complicated measurement to do during exercise testing. That was the first part on the impact of sildenafil. So as you can see, the general message is that we have to be careful if we are going to look at medication used in a very specific group of people with a disability performing. We need to be sure that we do not just translate what we learn from able-bodied to people with a disability, because sometimes the very specific, disability-specific physiology can make the difference. And so in this case, we did this with some help from WADA. We also advised WADA not to put that on the list of forbidden products. And if they would do it for able-bodied, then make an exception for those with spinal cord injury, because that would be study. The next thing what I want to talk about is this very specific aspect, and I stay with spinal cord injury. And how many people know autonomic dysreflexia? Does it ring a bell? How many people know this? Not too many? Okay, that are the people I know are involved with spinal cord injury. Okay, what is it? It's a very strange thing, very, very strange thing. At a certain moment, I'm just looking if I have time for anecdotes. Probably not. So let's try to explain it first, and perhaps there is time for anecdotes afterwards. What is happening is there is a pain stimulus which comes from below the lesion level, which means the person with spinal cord injury is having a pain stimulus but doesn't feel the pain. This could be, for example, in this example, is a full bladder. Yes, the person has been drinking a lot of water, the bladder is extremely full, the catheter going to a plastic bag is blocked, and the urine cannot get out of the bladder. So it's stressed, it's painful, he doesn't feel the pain, but he starts sweating. He starts feeling uncomfortable. He starts having goosebumps. And then at a certain moment he realizes, I'm doing an autonomic dysreflexia reaction. And what is happening is, very simply explained, is the pain stimulus is going to lead to a massive vasoconstriction. Yes, so the arteries, they close. As a reaction to that, blood pressure is rising. This is signaled at the baroreceptors. They say, hey, what is happening? We are getting in a hypertensive modus. Immediately, the brain is going to react to this by sending a signal down, vasodilation, open up again. We should not go in vasoconstriction, open up again. This signal goes down, but is blocked at the lesion level. So what is happening is very simple. There's a pain stimulus, massive vasoconstriction below the lesion level, massive vasodilation above. Constriction below, dilation above. The arteries go close down and open up in the upper part. Great, eh? This is great. Because I'm a wheelchair racer. And I need the blood where? In my arms. And now I have this venous return, which is not good. And now the venous return suddenly is helped by the vasoconstriction. And at the top, where I need the blood to the muscles, everything opens up. Excellent. This is a perfect way to physiologically boost my body, and I do not have to take a pill. I don't have to do anything except creating a pain stimulus. Yes. And what the nice thing is, the problem is, a pain stimulus, can you regulate pain? Yes. What can we do? You can drink. The bladder is under pressure. The pain stimulus is there. You do an autonomic reaction. You feel good. You feel better and better. Then it becomes too much because you get hypertension also in the brain. You become a little bit woozy. It's okay, it's too much. So open up the catheter a little bit. Fluid goes out. Pain stimulus is diminishing. And so you play with it all the time. You can play and organize your physiological reaction. This is in fact what is happening. Autonomic dysreflexia. And this is the reaction, vasoconstriction and vasodilation above. Below, above. Most of the time, full bladder is the cause, or urinary tract infection could be a reason, pressure sources that you have, or just pain because of shoes. At a certain moment, a friend of mine, he goes to a shop and he buys some new shoes. What do most of the people do when they buy new shoes? Well, they try both shoes and they walk. He's a paraplegic. He can't walk with the shoes. So he tries one shoe and says, okay, it's okay. My both feet are identical, so give me the other shoe, I'm leaving. He comes home and he puts the two shoes on. What happened in the shoe shop they took out the paper that is in the top of the shoe to keep the form. The guy forgot to take out the paper in the other shoe, and he had a little bit difficulties getting in. Yes. After about 10 minutes of wearing these shoes, he started to transpire. He felt really uncomfortable. He got a headache. And then at a certain moment he said, I have a pain stimulus somewhere, what is happening? And he found out that it was his shoe. Yes. That he forgot to take out the paper in the top of the shoe. So very, very bizarre. 5 minutes, Javier says. Is it important? Well, this is a case study from 2012, and I will be short. The person had an autonomic dysreflectic reaction because of some surgery that had been done for the urinary bladder. Yes. Very, very severe autonomic dysreflectic reaction. The medical doctors got it all under control. 3 weeks later, he did, untriggered, a new autonomic dysreflectic reaction, and he died. Because of autonomic dysreflexia and the consequences of it. And this is what the article says. A patient who has experienced autonomic dysreflexia and become free from the trigger might have another life-threatening episode of autonomic dysreflexia in around 1 to 2 weeks later because of an easily excitable autonomic nervous system. It is extremely dangerous. So what we did was, and I'm going to skip a few things here. Well, first of all, is it effective? Does it have impact on performance? This is a study done already in 1994. 8 people with spinal cord injury, high lesion levels. They did, with and without boosting, a time trial. One, they were not allowed to boost. Boosting means evoking the autonomic dysreflexia. And in the other one, they were allowed to do it. And what you see, 9.7 improvement in race time thanks to being allowed to boost your performance. 10%. It means instead of 30 minutes race time, you have 27 minutes. My good Lord, that is an enormous advantage. So it is effective, really. So IPC has taken some statements over there, but what is important is we did a survey on athletes with spinal cord injury to know what do they know about autonomic dysreflexia and what are they using it, yes or no. And we did this, and the last phase was that we used a questionnaire which was distributed in the Beijing Paralympic Games to the athletes we could retrieve with spinal cord injury, and also through this network. It's a network of International Network for the Advancement of Paralympic Sport through Science. It's a collaboration, so we could tackle quite a lot of athletes in different continents in the world. Okay, what's the result? Athletes' age of the population, as you can see, it's nicely spread from 16 to a little bit older than 46 years. You know that athletes with a disability very often are a little bit older on average than able-bodied athletes. Mainly male, we can find. Time since injury is quite spread. Some of them, a whole sample, 16 plus. Lesion level, most of the time, high lesion levels, of course, because we were looking at people with a lesion level higher than thoracic 6, and most of them here were spinal cord injured cervical lesion levels. Many came from wheelchair rugby, and the other ones from athletics, yes, and a few from basketball and from throwing. Most of them from athletics and wheelchair rugby. There we could find our athletes. Here. Have you ever heard of boosting as a performance enhancement strategy? Almost half of them, well, a little bit less than half of them say no. We don't know it. Have you ever intentionally induced autonomic dysreflexia to boost your performance in training or competition? Yes. Some of them during training, quite a lot during nationals where there is not too much of control, and only a few of them in international competition according to what they report. Of course, this anonymity was completely guaranteed, and there was a whole procedure to make them sure that whatever they said was never going to be used against them. These are the effects that they report. Less difficulty breathing, improved circulation, less overall fatigue, increased aggression, positive aggression in sport, increased alertness, and negative effects were about anxiety and frustration. And this is the most impressive part, I think. Is it dangerous? 50% said somewhat or not at all. This is really important when it comes to educational aspects, because we do not have too many means to control it. Because once an athlete in a marathon is on track, is gone, it's very difficult to control what he is doing. We can control in the call room, we can control up to the level that they are departing, but then we can, when they arrive, what is happening in this 1 hour and let's say in between 20 and 40 minutes that they are racing, and how to control that. Well, the control should come from the wisdom of the athlete, the knowledge of the athlete, that they should not do this because this is a dangerous thing. Not only at the moment itself, but sometimes also, what I showed you with the case study, sometimes also as a consequence later on. And also, when we asked them, more than 90% of the respondents reported that using banned drugs, like whatever kind of drugs you can take to improve performance, it's unacceptable. So most of the athletes agree it's unacceptable. And this percentage drops to 60-something when we talk about boosting, which means they do not see it in the same category. And it should be put in the same category because anti-doping is also about health. And this is a health issue. It's a really important health issue. And so just two comments that they made. One of the athletes mentioned, if boosting isn't controlled, someone will die. He was clearly aware of the whole problem. Another one said, if it is possible that all athletes can use boosting, it will be good. So we have to do something educational. Acknowledgements, I have to thank the World Anti-Doping Agency for both studies that we did, as well the study on sildenafil citrate as on the boosting study. And I always have to acknowledge also my 3 grandchildren, because all the time I'm spending here, I cannot spend to them. So, and that's why I always put them at the end of my presentation. This is Elias, this is Joris, and this is our little Emma, the first granddaughter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yves, for your inspiring keynote. Thank you also to your grandsons, of course, and granddaughter. And we're running out of time, so I would like just to suggest the audience to have some 5 minutes of question. I will suggest you to, even if you have some question, to keep the question, because we will have later a half-an-hour discussion after the panel regarding Paralympic sport with Oliver Martinez and Tony Pascual. But now, if you have some question for Yves Vanlandewijck, please go ahead.
If you have difficult questions, I will send them to Tony and to Oriol.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation, and congratulations for your work. It was very interesting. Would you like to explain what was the time of sildenafil administration, first of all, and what was a double-blind study? And third is, did you observe any adverse events?
The last one again?
Did you observe any adverse events with sildenafil administrations? And the last one is, did you take a blood sample to demonstrate that sildenafil was administered? But absorbed, sorry.
Okay, just repeat them one by one and I will answer them, that's easier.
What was the time of sildenafil administration?
It's 1 hour. It was 1 hour, I didn't mention that. So we waited 1 hour after taking the pill, they were in a complete rest. Then they did a warm-up, after that hour, and then we did the maximal time trial.
Maximal time,
Yes.
thank you. And what, it was a double-blind study?
Yes, and of course you can wonder how can you do a double blind when you are using sildenafil, because there are some reactions that that are not so blind. And well, it is the case that even when you take sildenafil, there has to be an external trigger to evoke erection of the penis in this case. So we only used ugly old men in the laboratory to do the testing, and so that there were no triggers at all in that case. But we asked all the athletes to fill out a complete list of side effects, what we call it. And I didn't put them on the table, they will be in the article. So, and there is a clear, of course, significant difference between having sildenafil side effects and sometimes other side effects. And for example, penis erection was one of them, but it also headache. One athlete, for example, had to stop the test because of a severe headache and couldn't complete it. So, but we have this administered, that's for sure.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions in the audience? I have a brief question for Yves. You came here with very nice examples of research that has been supported by WADA in the coordination with IPC. So as you has been suggesting at the beginning of your keynote, there is a strong necessity of accurate and good research regarding not only, of course, anti-doping processes regarding Paralympic sport, but also research in general regarding Paralympic sport. Which are now the main topics in this relationship between WADA and IPC regarding anti-doping research, if there is?
Well, there are when I have to talk about research in Paralympic sport, I have to say that a lot of answers have been formulated by researchers that have never been put on the table by the athletes. A lot of irrelevant research is done, enormously. That's a pity. And when we look at the questions of the athletes, the questions that really are at the heart of the Paralympic movement, sometimes are not tackled at all. And that is one of these questions, for example. The sildenafil is one of the questions. The impact of technology on performance is one of these questions. And of course, that's not one question, that's a whole cluster of questions. And that is the main thing that I have to conclude after many, many years in the Sport Science Committee, is that what we try to do now is to have a research agenda, and we have a priority research agenda that we try to communicate as much as possible in the conferences that make a difference, ACSM, ECSS, FIMS, ICSEMIS, all these big sports science conferences. We try to be present over there and address the research agenda of the IPC, so that we bring the questions to the academic world. And we hope that the academic world will pick it up and try to address those specific questions. And sometimes, yeah, so many crazy things are answered. A couple of years ago, there was, even in medicine and science and sports and exercise, there was a study published saying that backward wheelchair propulsion, backward, was more efficient than forward. Okay, what are we going to do with it? It's very interesting that somebody does it probably once, but this is not what we are waiting for. There are so many urgent questions that are out there. And at the other hand, for example, there is, and this will probably also be addressed later on today, the injury problem of athletes. There is still athletes who have more than 10 years of their life in a wheelchair, and they use it continuously in daily life, more than 10 years. From those people, about 75% in some articles, they say, have continuous shoulder pain because of repetitive strain injuries. So at this very moment, we need to understand perfectly what's going on, why these shoulders are under so much stress, and how we can tackle this so that it can be built into the training, so that we can keep those shoulders balanced, and so on and so on and so on. And there is not too much research focusing on that. See? But backward propulsion they do. See, that's my frustration sometimes, that these tons of irrelevant research, not relevant to the Paralympic movement at least.
Thank you, Yves, for bringing us the Paralympic research work that you are doing, and to present it here in this conference. Thank you very much for your participation.